This video is to go over some of the common mistakes that are seen with the body paragraphs or chunking in essay writing. This is especially for a standard essay that's following Jane Schaefer format. So first of all, this is an example of a good essay where they're following the structure. So let's just, for a reminder, look at the last sentence of the first paragraph should be a pink thesis. Then after that, each body paragraph should have a blue topic sentence and concluding sentence, and then a minimum of 2 green concrete details that are quotes or facts from the book with a page number like this cited, and then yellow commentary to explain it. Okay, so let's look at this one to see a good example, and then we're going to look at some problematic ones. So this essay was about, just looking straight to the thesis, is Lenny, George, and Curly's wife play main roles of showing power. So the thesis could be stronger, but the main idea here is that they're going to try to prove that these characters show some form of power in their essay. The first body paragraph is going to talk about Lenny. It says, throughout the story, Lenny is said to have physical power. So I know from this blue topic sentence that this whole paragraph will be about Lenny having physical power but not really mental power. And that relates to the thesis. So then they go on to say their concrete detail. For example, when George is telling the boss how good of a worker Lenny is, he replies with, quote, strong as a bull. And then they explain, this shows that Lenny's physical power or strength is equivalent to the strength of a powerful animal. Although he isn't the brightest, he has sufficient physical power to be a good worker. So notice how their quote does help to prove that Lenny has physical and mental power, and they explain it. And then they give another quote that shows that he has physical power. They say, in addition, when George is trying to explain why they shouldn't and will not get rabbits, Lenny explains why he killed them with, I'd pet them and pretty soon they'd bite my fingers and I'd pinch their heads a little and they was dead. This is actually talking about the mice. So it goes on to explain, even with a little pressure, Lenny's strength is shown with animals. Just by pinching them, he has the physical power that was enough to kill the rabbits. Okay. And then they conclude by saying Lenny's physical power is shown as strength throughout the whole story. So this is a kind of a good basic example of having a strong topic sentence, 2 quotes or facts to prove it, and explaining those facts or quote, and it all relates together. And then I'm going to see, if I was to continue to look at the next paragraph, I would see this person goes on to say, in every part of the story, George is seen as upholding power over Lenny. So I know, okay, now they're going to talk about George for a paragraph. So let's look at some problematic ones. In this essay, this student wrote, George, Lenny, and Curly are all human. However, each one of them hold more power than another that is portrayed many times. Again, the thesis is a little weak, but basically we know they're going to attempt to talk about power structures within the novel. Looking at their first topic sentence, they say, George is superior among the 3 guys for different reasons. He is socially more powerful. So I know that they mean that between George, Lenny, and Curly, that he's the most powerful. So let's look at how they are going to prove that. So far it's good. It relates back to their thesis. Their quote says, for instance, Lenny hesitated, backed away, looked wildly at the brush line as though he contemplated running for his freedom. George said coldly, you going to give me that mouse or do I have to sock you? What is wrong with this particular concrete detail? Well, what's wrong with it is that this is the scene in the book where it's just between George and Lenny. So it doesn't really specifically explain how George has power over over specifically Curly. And I think they meant Candy, but anyway, this quote, the problem here is this quote doesn't really go with proving what they're saying here or here. So the idea from this is you need to make sure that the quote that you pick is good and specific to what you're talking about in your topic sentence. Otherwise, a weak quote is going to ruin the whole section for you. Okay, let's look at another example. This person wrote their thesis is about characters like Candy, Curly's wife, and Crooks have a personal understanding of what independence and loneliness can do to you. This is a pretty good thesis. It's talking about loneliness between certain characters, which is great. But now look what happens when they go to start their first paragraph. It says, as you can see in the book, most of the characters can only depend on themselves. But characters like Candy had a companion, but sadly he was taken away. So what's wrong with this topic sentence here? The problem is the topic sentence is not a strong first indicator of what they're first going to talk about. So I can see from here they're going to talk about Candy, Curly's wife, and Crooks. So the topic sentence should have said something like maybe the first character that demonstrates loneliness is Candy, or something along those lines. But they don't really specifically say that, so I don't really have, just by reading this, I don't really understand what are they going to talk about in this paragraph. So you always want to make sure that your topic sentence gives me, or the reader, a clear understanding of what that paragraph will be about. Here's another one where the thesis says, the loneliness shown by the characters such as Candy, Curly's wife, and Crooks. So again, it's about loneliness. They're going to talk about how lonely Candy, Curly's wife, and Crooks are. So let's look at what happens here. They start off and they say, Candy shows various amounts of loneliness throughout the story to other people. Okay, so they're talking about how Candy is lonely, so I can kind of see that. Then the quote says, for example, I've been around him so much I never know how much he stinks. Well, this quote is talking about how much the dog stinks. This doesn't really go with directly telling me how Candy is lonely. So there's already a problem there, but let's see if the commentary helps to clarify. Carlson tells Candy that the dog smells, which is Candy's dog. Candy has been around him forever, that he never really noticed the smell or anything bad about him. So what's happening here is they're talking about how the dog smells and stuff, but they're not really relating it back to what does this have to do with Candy being lonely. So because of that, none of this is helping to prove the actual thesis statement that Candy's lonely. Now, they could have reworded it to say something like that his only companion was the dog, and that might have helped it along, but they didn't do that. So it's just, it more sounds like they're talking about just how much the dog smells. And then when it goes on, it says, in addition, he talks about he's had him since he was a pup. Okay, that maybe could show more how he's lonely. And then he says Candy's dog is really old, and that it was best to shoot the dog. So again, they're telling him about, this is about shooting the dog, but again, how does this relate to proving that Candy is lonely? Now maybe if they had switched it and said that, again, it was his only companion, then that would have made a difference. So you need to always make sure that your chunks here, your green and yellow chunks in the middle, are always proving your topic sentence in the paragraph, and they go back to your thesis. Everything has to connect together.